On a cold February morning in 2001, in the quiet town of Lumberton, North Carolina, a young woman named Tracy Renee Gilchrist left her small brick house on West 5th Street and never returned. She was 23 years old, a mother of 2 small children, working the evening shift at a local textile mill to make ends meet. Her car was found 3 days later, abandoned in a shopping center parking lot 12 miles away, keys still in the ignition, her purse untouched on the passenger seat. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no clear motive. The investigation that followed would consume hundreds of hours, involve multiple agencies, and eventually go cold for nearly 2 decades. But the question that haunted everyone who knew her remained unanswered. Where had Tracy Gilchrist gone, and who had taken her there? Lumberton sits in Robeson County, a place where tobacco fields stretch toward distant pine forests, and the Lumber River winds through flatlands that turn golden in autumn and gray in winter. In 2001, it was a town of just over 20,000 people, where everyone seemed to know everyone else, where shift changes at the factories marked the rhythm of daily life, and where a missing person was not just a statistic but a neighbor, a classmate, a friend. The downtown had seen better days, with boarded storefronts along Elm Street and a few surviving shops that opened early and closed by 6. But the neighborhoods were tidy, the churches full on Sundays, and people still left their doors unlocked when they ran to the corner store. Tracy lived on the west side of town in a modest rental house with chipped white paint and a small yard where her children played. She was petite, barely 5 feet 2 inches tall, with long brown hair she usually wore in a ponytail, and a quick smile that her coworkers at the mill remembered fondly. She had 2 children, a daughter named Kayla who was 4 and a son named Brandon who had just turned 2. Their father, Marcus Gilchrist, worked construction when the weather allowed and spent his evenings watching television or working on his truck in the driveway. Neighbors described them as a quiet couple, the kind who kept to themselves but waved when you drove past. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, Tracy woke early as she always did. The temperature that morning was 38 degrees, the sky overcast, the kind of gray that promised rain but never quite delivered. She made coffee in the small kitchen while her children slept in the back bedroom, their breathing soft and steady through the thin walls. She had laid out their clothes the night before, folded neatly on the dresser, a habit she had developed to save time in the mornings. At 7:15, she woke Kayla first, then Brandon, helping them dress and settling them at the table with bowls of cereal and cartoon voices murmuring from the small television in the living room. Marcus had already left for a job site in Pembroke, about 20 minutes south. He had kissed her goodbye around 6:30, his breath smelling of coffee and cigarettes, his work boots leaving faint mud prints on the linoleum floor. She had wiped them up after he left, running the mop over the kitchen while the children ate. These were the small rituals of her morning, repeated so often they had become automatic. Tracy's mother, Linda Ferguson, was supposed to pick up the children at 8:30. Tracy worked the second shift at the mill, 3 in the afternoon until 11 at night, assembling textile components in a building that smelled of machine oil and cotton dust. But that morning, she had an appointment at the health department at 9 for a routine checkup. Linda arrived precisely on time, as she always did, driving a burgundy sedan that made a ticking sound when the engine cooled. Tracy met her at the door with both children already in their coats, their small backpacks over their shoulders. "I should be back by 10, Tracy told her mother, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed against the cold. "I'll call you when I'm done." Linda would later remember that Tracy seemed tired that morning, that there were shadows under her eyes, but she attributed it to the long shifts and the demands of raising 2 small children. Tracy waved from the porch as her mother buckled the children into the backseat, Kayla clutching a stuffed rabbit and Brandon already half asleep again. The car pulled away at 8:37. A neighbor, Mrs. Dolores Hampton, who lived 2 houses down, saw Tracy go back inside and close the door. That was the last confirmed sighting of Tracy Renee Gilchrist alive. When Tracy did not call her mother by noon, Linda felt the first stirring of concern. When she did not answer her phone by 1, Linda drove back to the house on West 5th Street. The door was locked. Tracy's car, a white 1997 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper, was gone. Linda knocked, called through the windows, walked around to the back door. Nothing. She called Marcus, who said he had not heard from Tracy all day but assumed she was running errands. He sounded unconcerned, distracted by the sound of power tools in the background. By 3 o'clock, when Tracy had not shown up for her shift at the mill, Linda called the Lumberton Police Department. The officer who took the report was polite but not alarmed. Adults went missing all the time, he explained. They turned up. Give it 24 hours. But Linda Ferguson knew her daughter. Tracy did not disappear without explanation. She did not miss work. She did not leave her children without a word. The first official search began the following morning, February 15th, when Tracy had been missing for nearly 30 hours. The Lumberton Police Department sent 2 patrol units to canvass the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen anything unusual. Mrs. Hampton mentioned seeing Tracy go back inside around 8:40. Another neighbor, a retired mechanic named Carl Jensen, said he had heard a car start around 9:30 but had not looked out the window to see who it was. A third neighbor recalled seeing a white sedan that morning but could not say whether it was Tracy's. Marcus Gilchrist met the officers at the house that afternoon. He unlocked the door with his own key and they walked through together. Everything appeared undisturbed. The breakfast dishes were washed and stacked in the drainer. The beds were made. Tracy's purse was missing, along with her wallet and identification. Her coat was gone from the hook by the door. It looked, the officers noted in their report, as though she had simply left for the day and not come back. Marcus stood in the living room with his hands in his pockets, his face blank. She probably just needed some space, he told them. We had a little argument the other night. She'll turn up. The officers asked what the argument had been about. Marcus shrugged. Nothing serious. Money, bills, the usual. They asked if Tracy had friends she might be staying with. Marcus named a few women from the mill, a cousin in Fayetteville. The officers wrote down the names and said they would follow up. On February 17th, 3 days after Tracy disappeared, her car was found in the parking lot of a strip mall on Fayetteville Road, about 12 miles from her home. A security guard noticed it because it had been sitting in the same spot for 2 days, and the mall had a policy about abandoned vehicles. He called it in. When the police arrived, they found the white Honda Civic unlocked, the keys in the ignition, the engine cold. Tracy's purse was on the passenger seat, her wallet inside containing her driver's license, $17 in cash, and a photo of her children. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no damage to the vehicle. Clear's throat. The discovery of the car shifted the investigation into higher gear. The Robeson County Sheriff's Office joined the effort, bringing additional manpower and resources. Detectives interviewed everyone who knew Tracy, starting with family and expanding outward to coworkers, neighbors, acquaintances. A pattern began to emerge in the testimony, small details that did not quite align. Tracy's coworkers at the mill said she had seemed withdrawn in the weeks before she disappeared. She had stopped joining them for lunch breaks, stopped talking about weekend plans. One woman, Janet Ellis, who worked the assembly line beside Tracy, said she had noticed bruises on Tracy's arms in early February. I asked her about it, Janet told detectives, and she just said she was clumsy, that she had bumped into a doorframe. But the way she said it, the way she looked away when she said it, I wondered. Another co-worker, Denise Faulkner, mentioned that Tracy had asked her once quietly if she knew anyone who rented rooms or apartments cheap. She said she was just curious, Denise recalled, but it seemed like more than that, like she was planning something. Detectives also spoke to Tracy's cousin in Fayetteville, a woman named Angela Moss. Angela said Tracy had called her in January, asking if she could stay with her for a few days. She sounded upset, Angela said, but when I asked her what was wrong, she said never mind, that she would figure it out. The investigation turned its focus toward Marcus Gilchrist. His account of the morning Tracy disappeared was straightforward but vague. He said he had left for work around 6:30, driven to a job site in Pembroke, and worked until 4 in the afternoon. He provided the name of the foreman, who confirmed Marcus had been there. But there was a window, detectives noted, between 6:30 and 9 when Marcus could have returned home. They looked at his truck, a blue Ford F-150 with a toolbox bolted in the bed. The odometer reading seemed consistent with his story. They checked his phone records. No unusual calls. They asked him to take a polygraph. He agreed. The results were inconclusive, the examiner noting that Marcus appeared nervous but not deceptive. Those who knew Marcus said he was quiet, reserved, not given to outbursts. But a few people mentioned that he could be controlling, that he did not like Tracy working, that he had opinions about what she wore and who she talked to. A bartender at a local tavern remembered Marcus coming in once or twice a month, drinking alone, never causing trouble. He seemed sad more than anything, the bartender said, like he was carrying something heavy. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about the husband. He was always the first suspect in cases like these. The statistics made that clear. But they had no evidence, no witnesses placing him at the scene, no motive beyond the vague tensions of a struggling marriage. Weeks turned into months. Volunteers searched the woods along the Lumber River, the abandoned buildings on the edge of town, the ditches beside country roads. Flyers with Tracy's photograph appeared on telephone poles and storefront windows. A local television station ran a segment asking for information. Tips came in, dozens of them, all leading nowhere. Someone thought they saw her at a gas station in South Carolina. Another caller swore she was living in Wilmington under a different name. Every lead was followed, every claim investigated. By summer, the case had gone cold. The search team stopped meeting. The flyers faded in the sun. The detectives moved on to other cases, though Tracy's file remained open, a box of notes and photographs gathering dust in a storage room at the county courthouse. Marcus Gilchrist went back to work, went back to his routines. Linda Ferguson kept the children, raising them in her own home across town. She filed for custody, and Marcus did not contest it. He visited them on weekends, bringing toys and fast food, sitting quietly in Linda's living room while Kayla and Brandon played. He never talked about Tracy, never mentioned her name. It was as though she had simply evaporated, leaving behind only the question marks in a case file no one read anymore. Clears throat. By 2005, 4 years after Tracy disappeared, Marcus had remarried. His new partner, a woman named Sheila Prout, worked as a hairdresser in Lumberton. They lived together in a different house on the south side of town, a rancher with a fenced yard and a swing set that Kayla and Brandon used when they visited. Sheila seemed kind, patient with the children, careful not to overstep. She never asked Marcus about his first relationship, and he never offered details. It was understood between them that the past was the past. But the children remembered. Kayla, who was 8 by then, had started drawing pictures in school that worried her teachers. Dark figures, houses with no doors, people with blank faces. The school counselor called Linda Ferguson, who brought Kayla in for an evaluation. The therapist asked gentle questions, and Kayla answered in whispers, her eyes fixed on the floor. Brandon, who was 6, had nightmares. He woke screaming 2 or 3 times a week, calling for his mother, inconsolable until Linda sat with him in the dark, stroking his hair and humming old hymns. He could not articulate what he dreamed, only that it frightened him, that he saw shadows moving in the corners of rooms. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the slow erosion of trust without being able to name what caused it, the years after a disappearance are a kind of purgatory. Linda Ferguson existed in that space, caring for her grandchildren, maintaining the routines of ordinary life while carrying the constant weight of not knowing. She attended church every Sunday, sitting in the same pew she had occupied for 30 years, praying for answers that never came. She kept Tracy's room exactly as it had been, the bed made, the closet full of clothes, as though her daughter might walk through the door at any moment. The marriage between Marcus and Sheila began to show cracks by 2007. Neighbors noticed them arguing in the driveway, their voices rising and falling, though the words were never clear. Sheila confided in a friend that Marcus had moods, that he could go days without speaking, locked in some internal silence she could not penetrate. She said he drank more than he used to, that he stayed up late watching television, falling asleep on the couch and waking disoriented in the early morning hours. In the fall of 2008, Sheila moved out. She took an apartment on the other side of town and filed for separation. She told her sister that she could not live with the questions anymore, that Marcus was haunted by something he would not name, and that she was tired of being the one who absorbed his silences. Marcus stayed in the house alone. He continued working construction, showing up on time, doing his job without complaint. But coworkers noticed he had lost weight, that his hands shook sometimes when he held his coffee cup, that he seemed to be fatting, becoming translucent. Then in March 2010, 9 years after Tracy disappeared, something shifted. Kayla Gilchrist, who was 13 years old by then, sat down with her grandmother one evening after dinner. They were alone in the house, Brandon having gone to spend the night with a friend. Kayla had been quiet all through the meal, pushing food around her plate, not meeting Linda's eyes. When Linda asked if something was wrong, Kayla hesitated, then began to speak. She said she remembered the morning her mother disappeared. She said she had woken early before her grandmother arrived and had gone into the kitchen for a drink of water. She said she saw her father and her mother standing by the back door, their voices low but tense. She said her mother was crying and her father was holding her arm, his fingers tight around her wrist. She said she heard her mother say, "Please, just let me go." She said her father did not answer, that he just stood there, his face empty. Kayla had been 4 years old when it happened. For 9 years, she had carried the memory without understanding it, without knowing whether it was real or imagined. But as she grew older, the image had become clearer, more insistent, and she could no longer keep it to herself. Linda listened without interrupting. When Kayla finished, Linda held her for a long time, neither of them speaking. Then she called the Robeson County Sheriff's Office. Clears throat. On March 22, 2010, Detective Raymond Coles reopened the Tracy Gilchrist case. He had been with the department for 15 years and remembered the original investigation, though he had not been the lead detective. He read through the file carefully, taking notes on the timeline, the interviews, the inconsistencies that had never been resolved. Then he drove to Linda Ferguson's house and sat down with Kayla. Kayla repeated her account, her voice steady but quiet. Detective Coles recorded the conversation, asking clarifying questions, trying to establish details. What time had she seen them? Early, before the sun was fully up. What were they wearing? Her mother had on a nightgown and her father was dressed for work. How long did she watch? Only a few seconds before she went back to her room, frightened by the tension in their voices. It was not enough for an arrest, but it was enough to reopen the investigation with renewed focus. Detective Coles began re-interviewing witnesses, starting with the neighbors on West 5th Street. Mrs. Hampton, who had seen Tracy go back inside at 8:40, was asked if she had noticed anything unusual earlier that morning. She thought for a moment, then said she had heard a car door slam around 7, maybe 7:15, and had glanced out the window. She had seen Marcus's truck in the driveway, which had struck her as odd because she thought he left for work earlier than that. Carl Jensen, the retired mechanic, was asked again about the car he had heard starting around 9:30. This time, pressed for more details, he said it had sounded like a truck, not a sedan. He had assumed it was someone in the neighborhood heading out for the day. The pieces began to fit differently when viewed through the lens of suspicion. Detective Coles requested Marcus Gilchrist's phone records again, this time going back further, looking at patterns over months rather than days. He found that Marcus had made several calls to a number registered to a small motel on the outskirts of Lumberton in the weeks before Tracy disappeared. When questioned, the motel manager checked his records and found that Marcus had rented a room there twice in January 2001, paying in cash, staying only a few hours each time. Detective Coles also re-examined the car. The white Honda Civic had been processed for evidence in 2001, but nothing significant had been found. Now, nearly a decade later, advances in forensic technology allowed for more sensitive testing. The car had been impounded and stored in a lot behind the county garage. Coles had it towed to the state crime lab in Raleigh, where technicians went over it inch by inch. They found traces of cleaning solution on the steering wheel and dashboard, suggesting someone had wiped down the interior. They found a single hair, not Tracy's, caught in the fabric of the back seat. DNA testing matched it to Marcus Gilchrist. On its own, the hair meant little. Marcus had driven the car before, had been a passenger in it countless times. But combined with the other evidence, the inconsistencies, the timeline discrepancies, the motel receipts, Kayla's testimony, it painted a picture that was growing clearer. In June 2010, Detective Coles brought Marcus Gilchrist in for questioning. Marcus came willingly, sitting across the table in a small interview room at the sheriff's office, his hands folded in his lap. He looked older than his 37 years, his hair thinning, his face lined with fatigue. Detective Coles walked him through the timeline again, asking the same questions that had been asked 9 years earlier. Marcus gave the same answers, his voice flat, his expression unchanging. Then Coles mentioned the motel receipts. Marcus hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the door, then back to the detective. "I needed space sometimes," Marcus said. "Things were tense at home. I just needed a place to think." Coles asked why he had not mentioned the motel rooms during the original investigation. Marcus shrugged. Didn't seem relevant. Coles asked about the cleaning solution found in Tracy's car. Marcus said he had no idea how it got there, that Tracy must have cleaned the car herself. Coles asked about the hair. Marcus said he had ridden in the car plenty of times, that finding his hair there proved nothing. The interview went on for 3 hours. Marcus never raised his voice, never became defensive, never asked for a lawyer. He simply repeated his story over and over like a worn recording. He had gone to work. He had stayed at work. He had not seen Tracy after he left the house at 6:30 that morning. But Detective Coles noticed something. When asked about Kayla's testimony about the memory of seeing him holding Tracy's arm by the back door, Marcus's face went completely still. He did not deny it, did not call Kayla a liar, did not offer an explanation. He just sat there, staring at the table, his jaw tight. "Do you remember that morning?" Coles asked quietly. "Do you remember holding her arm?" Marcus did not answer. The silence stretched out, filling the room like water rising. Finally Marcus spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want a lawyer." Clear's throat. The case against Marcus Gilchrist was built slowly, carefully, over the following months. Prosecutors knew they were working without a body, without a confession, without a clear cause of demise. What they had was circumstantial evidence, a web of small details that suggested guilt but did not prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. In October 2010, the district attorney, a methodical woman named Patricia Caldwell, convened a grand jury. Over 3 days, they heard testimony from Detective Coles, from Linda Ferguson, from Kayla Gilchrist, from the neighbors, the co-workers, the motel manager. They reviewed phone records, forensic reports, photographs of the abandoned car. On October 28, 2010, the grand jury returned an indictment charging Marcus Anthony Gilchrist with the intentional ending of Tracy Renee Gilchrist. Marcus was arrested at his home on the morning of October 29th. Deputies arrived at 6:30, the same time he used to leave for work all those years ago. He answered the door in a t-shirt and jeans, his face unsurprised as though he had been expecting them. He did not resist, did not ask questions. He simply held out his wrists for the handcuffs and walked to the patrol car in silence. The arrest made front-page news in Lumberton. The local television stations ran stories showing footage of Marcus being led into the courthouse, his head down, his lawyer beside him. The community was divided. Some believed he was guilty, had always believed it, pointed to the statistics, the history of domestic tension, the way he had moved on so quickly after Tracy disappeared. Others insisted there was no proof, that the case was built on a child's uncertain memory and a prosecutor's ambition, that in America you were innocent until proven guilty. Linda Ferguson gave a brief statement to the press outside the courthouse. She stood on the steps, flanked by her pastor and a victim's advocate, her voice steady but strained. "I have waited 9 years for this day," she said. "I have raised my grandchildren wondering every single day where their mother is, what happened to her, whether she suffered. I do not know if we will ever find Tracy, but I know that someone needs to answer for what happened to her. And I believe that person is Marcus Gilchrist." The trial began in February 2012, nearly 11 years after Tracy disappeared. The courtroom was packed every day, with reporters, family members, curious townspeople who came to witness the unfolding of a mystery that had haunted their community for a decade. Marcus sat at the defense table in a dark suit, his expression carefully neutral, while his attorney, a public defender named Gerald Towns, argued that the prosecution's case was built on speculation, not evidence. Patricia Caldwell laid out the timeline methodically. She called Detective Coles to the stand, who explained the investigation, the inconsistencies, the motel receipts, the forensic findings. She called Kayla Gilchrist, who was 15 by then, poised and heartbreakingly composed, and asked her to describe what she had seen that morning. Kayla spoke clearly, her eyes never leaving the jury, recounting the image of her father holding her mother's arm, her mother's plea to be let go. The defense cross-examined her gently, asking if she was certain the memory was real, if perhaps she had constructed it over the years based on things she had been told, on her own grief and confusion. Kayla did not waver. "I know what I saw," she said quietly. "I have carried it with me every day since." Caldwell called Janet Ellis and Denise Faulkner, who testified about the bruises, the withdrawn behavior, Tracy's questions about cheap apartments. She called Angela Moss, who recounted the January phone call when Tracy had asked to stay with her. She called Mrs. Hampton and Carl Jensen, who described the sounds and sightings that did not quite match Marcus's timeline. The defense called Marcus's former foreman, who testified that Marcus had been at the job site in Pembroke all day on February 14, 2001. But under cross-examination, he admitted that workers came and went throughout the day, that he had not watched Marcus every minute, that it was possible someone could have left for an hour or two without being noticed. The defense called Sheila Prout, Marcus's former partner, who testified that Marcus had never been aggressive toward her, had never given her reason to fear him. But she also admitted, when pressed, that he had been troubled, haunted, that she had left him because she could not live with the weight of his unspoken guilt. Marcus himself did not testify. His lawyer advised against it, knowing that the prosecution would tear apart his story, would press him on every inconsistency, every unanswered question. So Marcus sat silent throughout the trial, his face a mask, while the evidence accumulated around him. The jury deliberated for 4 days. On February 23, 2012, they returned a verdict: guilty of second-degree intentional harm resulting in the end of life. The courtroom erupted in gasps and sobs. Linda Ferguson wept openly, held by her pastor, while Kayla and Brandon sat stone-faced, their hands clasped together. Marcus showed no reaction. He simply stood when the judge instructed him to stand, his shoulders slightly slumped, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. Clears throat. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a stern man named Leonard Hutchins who had presided over the case with quiet authority, addressed the courtroom before pronouncing the sentence. He spoke about the nature of justice, about the burden of proof, about the responsibility of the court to protect the innocent while holding the guilty accountable. He acknowledged that the case was circumstantial, that there were questions that might never be answered, but he said the jury had weighed the evidence and reached a conclusion that he believed was just. He sentenced Marcus Gilchrist to 25 years to life in the state penitentiary. Marcus was led away in handcuffs, his face still blank, still unreadable. He did not look at his children, did not look at Linda Ferguson, did not look at anyone. He simply walked out of the courtroom flanked by deputies, disappearing through a side door into the holding area beyond. In the years that followed, attempts were made to find Tracy's remains. Search teams returned to the woods along the Lumber River, to the abandoned properties Marcus had worked on in 2001, to the rural areas where he had been known to hunt and fish. Cadaver canines were brought in, ground-penetrating radar employed, but nothing was ever found. Tracy Renee Gilchrist remains missing to this day, her final resting place known only to the person who put her there. Marcus Gilchrist has never confessed, never provided information about what happened to Tracy or where she might be. He maintains his innocence, though he has filed no appeals. He serves his sentence in silence, just as he sat through his trial, just as he lived the years after Tracy disappeared. Kayla and Brandon Gilchrist are adults now. Kayla became a social worker, dedicating her life to helping families in crisis, to recognizing the signs of harm before it escalates. Brandon joined the military, finding structure and purpose in service. They visit their grandmother often, sitting in the same living room where they grew up, looking at photographs of a mother they barely remember but have never forgotten. Linda Ferguson is in her 70s now. She still keeps Tracy's room untouched, still attends the same church, still waits for the phone call that will tell her where her daughter is. She has forgiven Marcus Gilchrist, she says, not because he deserves it but because carrying the anger was too heavy a burden. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Every February 14th, she places flowers on an empty grave in the town cemetery, a marker she had installed years ago, a place to mourn even without a body to bury. The case of Tracy Gilchrist is a reminder that some questions outlast the people who ask them, that justice is not always complete, that closure is a luxury not everyone receives. It is a story about the weight of secrets, the cost of silence, and the courage it takes to speak truth even when the truth is unbearable. Tracy deserved better than the life she lived, better than the end she met, better than the years of obscurity that followed. But her children survived, her mother endured, and the person responsible finally faced consequences, even if the full story will never be known. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.